Okay, we're gonna sit this far away. This is always the hard part, determining how far away do I sit? Let's get into it. Welcome back to Reasons We Believe. Today we are covering the topic of fine-tuning, which reflects on the complex and delicate balance of the conditions in our natural world that ultimately allow for all of life to exist. You see, it seems that our universe is finely tuned for life when we consider things like the initial physical constants, which we will explain and simplify very soon. Scientists have started to call our universe a Goldilocks universe. Things are not too hot or too cold, but rather just right for life to exist, and not only exist, but to thrive. To start things off, I want to quote Stephen Hawking in the last chapter of his final book, where he makes a very interesting claim, I think, especially for an atheist. He says, "We have this one life to appreciate the grand design of the universe, and for that, I am extremely grateful." I don't know about you, but I agree with Mr. Hawking here. I am very glad that I have this life to appreciate the grand design of the natural world, to immerse myself in the beauty of nature and not worry about the force of gravity crushing me or being, quite frankly, eliminated from this world because of the disastrous natural laws. I don't have to worry about that. I'm pretty grateful for it. Today, our focus will center on that little word that Hawking used, designed. When we look at the characteristics of our universe, it really does appear to be designed. Related to this idea is how Richard Dawkins defines biology. He says that it is the study of complicated things that have the appearance of having been designed with a purpose. And that is very much so related to what we're diving into today. Now, it is true we have only explored an infinitesimal fraction of our grand universe, but from what we do know, it is safe to say that it is certainly complex and finely tuned. Alright, so what evidence is there for a finely tuned universe, and what does this ultimately mean in regard to there being a God or not? Just want to know, as always, if you have questions or more curiosity on this topic, I'll be linking some helpful material in the description. Let's get into it. There are a few ways that we can arrange the argument for fine-tuning, but the one we are going to consider today goes like this. First premise. The fine-tuning of the universe is either due to physical necessity, chance, or design. Premise 2. It is not due to physical necessity or chance. Conclusion, therefore, it is due to design. This is a fairly complex topic, and it has a lot to do with calculations and numbers in science, and I know that some people like to explain and unpack complex topics like this in complex ways, supporting claims with a lot of heavy scientific and mathematical evidence and examples, while others like to make complex ideas simple. I'm going to try to do my best to do a little bit of both to speak to both sides of the audience. So if things start to get complicated and confusing, it might be because I'm not doing the best job at explaining it, but I promise I won't throw numbers and quotations your way willy-nilly. We won't stay in the thick of calculations and quotations forever. We will keep it simple in a lot of ways. So hang with me here. I think you'll find this topic super interesting, and I hope it gets you thinking. So let's start with that first premise. The fine-tuning of the universe is either due to physical necessity, chance, or design. This all assumes right off the bat that the universe is in fact finely tuned. And while the idea of a finely tuned universe isn't actually controversial at all within the scientific community, it's accepted by atheists and theists alike, I want to spend some time illustrating and unpacking the various ways in which the universe is finely tuned, to not just assume it is, but to prove it is. And also, it's kind of mind-blowing when you look at the examples of how delicate our universe is balanced. And just for reference, design and fine-tuning are not the same thing. So fine-tuning is the delicate balance of the universe, and design is the claim that a source of divine intelligence designed the universe to be the way it is. We'll touch on that very soon. So a simple way of thinking of fine-tuning comes from an Addition by Physics report, which says the usual meaning of fine-tuning is that small changes in the value of a parameter can lead to significant changes in the system as a whole. So basically, a small tweak in one area can throw the whole universe off course. That's what we mean when we're talking about fine-tuning. The fine-tuning of the laws and constants of physics were some of the most amazing discoveries of the 20th century. A man named Sir Fred Hoyle was tightly associated to this whole idea, and he made a lot of groundwork relating to the carbon molecule. Essentially, Hoyle found that the conditions necessary to allow for carbon to form were incredibly improbable, as many conditions had to combine to make that formation possible. Now, we need carbon. All of life is carbon-based. And carbon is formed in the centers of stars during nuclear synthesis. That's where we get carbon from. But Hoyle picked up on some very important information. If the gravitation in stars are tweaked by just a hair, carbon cannot form. If the gravitation in stars are too weak by just a hair, if they were less strong than they are by just the tiniest amount, carbon would not be able to form. And similarly, if it was too strong by just a hair, that star would burn, and again, carbon cannot form. Because of the discoveries from Hoyle and others, we now know that aspects of the universe such as the expansion rate, the strength of gravitational attraction, and strong nuclear force all have to be just right to allow for life. Now, Hoyle began his scientific career as a resolved atheist. But at the end of his life, he declared that life must have been the result of some unseen intelligence, and that there is a coherent plan for the universe, although I admit I have no idea what it is. To all of these discoveries related to fine-tuning, Hoyle added, "A common sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super intellect had monkeyed with the physics, as well as the chemistry and biology, and that there are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature. The numbers one calculates from the facts seems to me so overwhelming as to put this conclusion almost beyond question." Pretty powerful quote from Mr. Hoyle, but what are these facts and calculations that he's talking about? Luke Barnes, who has received his PhD in astronomy from Cambridge, wrote an extensive article, which is linked below, outlining the calculations of some of the fundamental constants that have life-permitting values. In other words, they have to fall within a very narrow range of values to allow for complex life on Earth. So for reference, fundamental physical constants are quantities that cannot be explained by a theory and are therefore measured experimentally. They are carefully dialed to a precise value, falling within a narrow, life-permitting range. No one knows what exactly determines these values. They are simply measured, not derived. They just are the way that they are. We can express these constants quantitatively in numbers, such as the constant of the mass of an electron, which that number will be seen on the screen before you, but if you're listening to this, just to illustrate how it's quantifiable, the constant of the mass of an electron is 9.109 times 10 to the negative 31st kilogram. So yeah, there's that. Just in case you wanted to know, I just wanted to illustrate how these values are quantifiable. Anyways, essentially, Barnes did the math and he found that considering the very narrow values that things like the cosmological constant and photon ratios and strange quark couplings have to fall into. So considering all of that, the likelihood of a life-permitting universe by chance, an unguided life-permitting universe, is less than 10 to the negative 136 power. Let me give you some examples of how, if these numbers were tweaked by just the smallest bit, life would cease to exist. The cosmological constant. This has to do with the rate of the expansion of the universe when it began. If the cosmological constant was changed by 1 part in 10 to the 120th power, that's a super small number, in either direction, making it either more negative or more positive, the universe would be life prohibiting. Consider also gravity, which is determined by the gravitational constant. If this constant varied by just 1 in 10 to the 60th parts, none of us would exist. Because the universe would have expanded and thinned out too rapidly or collapsed back in on itself, there's no life either way. If you want some more examples of these numbers and fundamental constants, go ahead and check the links in the description. But now I'm going to move on to just citing some more simple examples of the delicate and balanced nature of our universe, so less of numbers and more just examples in the universe. But again, these are just some of the examples I found in my research, but they really helped me to appreciate the fine-tuned aspect of our world, and I hope they do the same for you. So first of all, from Stephen Hawking, I've read this quote in a video in the past, but I'll go ahead and read it again here. If the rate of expansion 1 second after the Big Bang had been smaller by even 1 part in 100,000 million, it would have collapsed before it reached its present size. If it had been greater by part in a million, the universe would have expanded too rapidly for stars and planets to form. From phys.org, The values of many forces and particles in the universe, represented by some 30 so-called fundamental constants, all seem to line up perfectly to enable the evolution of intelligent life. From the same source, Fred Adams, a physicist at the University of Michigan, has discovered that the mass of a quark called down quark, quarks are elementary particles which make up the atomic nucleus, can only change by a factor of 7 before rendering the universe, as we know, lifeless. Dang. I didn't even know what a down quark is, but I'm really glad that it didn't change by a factor of 7, because apparently we'd be doomed. So we've spent some time talking about the universe as a whole, but what about the planet we call home? It turns out our planet Earth is very privileged. The Air and Space Museum puts it this way: our solar system includes 7 other planets and many moons and other small worlds, but only Earth has the ingredients for life as we know it. The Center for Astrophysics states that any planet's orbit has to lie in the habitable zone where the planet's surface is just the right temperature for liquid water to exist. Every form of life we know requires liquid water, so any planet too close or too far from its host star, which is the sun for us, is less likely to contain life. So, we are perfectly positioned near the sun, but other planets don't have it this good. NASA says the habitable zone around our sun stretches roughly from the orbit of Venus to the orbit of Mars. Venus is generally believed to be too hot to support life. Earth, it appears, is just right. Getting back to the idea of the Goldilocks universe, it's just right. From Live Science. But if the moon were half the distance from Earth as it is now, the tides would be 8 times higher. Some islands would be completely underwater for much of the day, and populated coastlines would likely become uninhabitable because of the high tides. If the moon were suddenly twice as close to Earth, the effect would be like hitting a gong with a mallet. Waves of energy would reverberate through the planet due to the sudden increased strength of the moon's gravitational pull. Not only are we perfectly positioned between the sun, but also the moon. Other planets do not have it this good. Take, for example, Jupiter's moon Io, the most volcanically active world in the solar system. Io's volcanism, whatever that word is, results from the push and pull of the gravity of Jupiter and 2 of its other moons. Earth might have a similar fate if the moon were suddenly half as close. Speaking of Jupiter, again, I've already mentioned this fact in another video. I'm going to repeat myself here. This is a quote from NASA about Jupiter. In our own solar system, Jupiter plays an important protective role by deflecting comets and asteroids that might have otherwise hit Earth. Jupiter has helped to create a more stable environment for life. If not for Jupiter, it's possible that advanced life may have never gained a foothold. All right, that's enough examples for now. Hopefully the point has been proven that our universe as a whole and our own planet Earth are extremely finely tuned to allow for life on Earth to exist. But what do scientists have to say about all of this? Let's take a look. This is from Stephen Hawking. The remarkable fact is that the values of these numbers seem to have been very finely adjusted to make possible the development for life. If anyone claims not to be surprised by the special features the universe has, he is hiding his head in the sand. These special features are surpassing and unlikely. David Deutsch. All right, that's the first premise. Let's consider the second premise. So, the universe is finely tuned. That much does not seem controversial. This fine-tuning is also not hypothetical, but as Luke Barnes puts it, a force of physics that needs to be explained. In an exchange with Stephen C. Meyer, atheist Lawrence Krauss denied the design behind fine-tuning, but he did not dismiss fine-tuning altogether. He agreed it's a fact of physics. But what best explains these finely dialed characteristics of the universe? Physical necessity, chance, or design? Oh boy. First, let's talk about physical necessity. This is basically the idea that the universe has to be life permitting. The values we observe could not be otherwise. We don't need to be surprised at all that the universe is the way it is. This is the idea behind physical necessity. But common sense will tell you, especially considering the examples we just looked at, a life permitting universe is not the only option. A life-permitting planet is also not the only option. Look at the other less privileged planets we can readily observe in our solar system. It is actually more likely that the universe wouldn't be here than be here. Constants and quantities are not determined by the laws of nature. They are independent. They simply are. There is no evidence or reason to suggest fine-tuning is the necessary or only option for the way things have to be. In short, the fundamental physical constants of the universe, which happen to be finely balanced, did not have to be finely balanced. They could have been any given number. But before we discuss chance, I want to touch on the weak anthropic principle because it's related to the theory of physical necessity, and I received a comment about it on an earlier video. The weak anthropic principle, that's just its name, I'm not calling it weak on my own terms, says, hey, don't be surprised you're living in a universe that has conditions that led to your existence. After all, you're alive. Of course, the universe would allow you to be here. Nothing needs to be explained because there is no surprise. While it's no surprise that we are here, because the universe is set up for us to be here, it is a surprise that the universe is set up that way. In other words, our existence isn't too much of a surprise, but the universe's existence is. This theory fails to reckon with the incredible improbability of the conditions necessary for our existence. We still need an explanation for this improbability, for the finely tuned initial conditions. So physical necessity does not seem to give us this explanation, but what about chance? Could we have just won the cosmic lottery and gotten really, really lucky with the state of the universe? The theory of chance behind fine-tuning is where we get the multiverse theory. The multiverse theory has been very popular among atheistic scientists, and it posits that there is a universe-generating machine or mechanism of sorts out there, which generates a bunch of universes. And so all of the universes have sprung from this same machine, and our universe is just one of many outcomes of the cosmic lottery. So it sort of puts forward that mathematically, since there's an infinite amount of universes that are being put out there, one of them eventually will get it right. We'll get all of the conditions necessary for life, and that is the universe that you and I find ourselves in. We just got really lucky. That's the idea behind the multiverse. This theory does acknowledge the necessary conditions to make life possible are highly improbable. Gotta give the multiverse theory that one. But it has very significant problems. For one thing, the mechanisms suggested to make these universes are things like inflationary cosmology, which itself requires prior fine-tuning. Something has to be fine-tuning this mechanism or this machine that is generating all of these worlds. But moreover, there is no evidence for a multiverse. It cannot be detected, and it is hypothetical, and science does not deal with hypotheticals. All the probabilities we discussed earlier make this theory beyond reason, and that is the ultimate problem with the multiverse theory. It's just improbable. Even if a multiverse did exist, we would likely see a functioning universe that was much simpler and smaller be a result of this universe machine. But instead, we observe a vast, complex, and highly ordered universe with billions of people to observe it. This is just a thought that I didn't come across in my research, but it's just me on the back end positing my reactions to the multiverse. While it is still something I would really like to be more well read up on, just looking at this from surface level, I've mentioned an idea like this in my previous episodes. The multiverse theory seems to me, if you are willing to take the leap of faith and believe that there is a universe generating machine or mechanism somewhere out there, why don't you believe in God? It seems to me that those things are definitely very different, but also similar in the fact that, you can't necessarily see them. It seems to me that faith is tied to both of those ideas, but because of how improbable it is that a universe generating machine would produce all of what we see, I'm gonna lean towards the other side with the designer. To wrap up, I want to cite Christopher Hitchens, who is an author and atheist, and he's gone on record pondering the claims of the fine-tuning argument. He says in a video, which is available on YouTube, and I'll link it below, super cool video. It's kind of like he's in a car talking with one of his intellectual peers, and he says that at some point, quote, "At some point we are all asked, which is the best argument you come up against from the other side? Every one of us picks the fine-tuning one as the most intriguing. Even though it doesn't prove design, you have to spend time thinking about it. So even if you side with Hitchens that the apparent design of the universe doesn't prove design, I encourage you to spend time thinking about it." Creator or no creator, you must admit that the universe is full of order and complexity. Random chaotic events do not produce order. Order does not come from unguided chaos. I would argue, if theism is true, the universe is actually what we would expect it to be. We see the results of an intentional, intelligent designer. I believe that the universe appears to be designed because it is designed. My take on this could be wrong, and I'm willing to admit that, but I see God's fingerprints everywhere. I will not deny that there are things such as natural disasters by which this finely tuned universe experiences chaos. But looking at the blueprint for the world at large and then our own privileged planet Earth, I see the mind of a designer. I agree with Sir Fred Hoyle that a super intellect has monkeyed with the physics. In the next episode, we are going to discuss DNA, that little molecule inside every creature, and how it ultimately is another example of God's handiwork. Just a quick little note before we end. I know that everybody listening to this comes from various different beliefs and worldviews. There are atheists, agnostics, theists, and more specifically, like-minded Christians listening to these videos and episodes. There are those who share my interest in apologetics and those who look down on the practice. First of all, regardless of your worldview, thank you for listening to this episode and for tuning in. I want to give you a little idea of where these episodes are going in the future. I wanted to start out talking big picture, addressing the idea of whether or not it's logical to believe in any sort of God, because if there is no logical reason to believe in any sort of God, why would I ever get into the specifics of my Christian worldview? But now that we are starting to establish why it is at least logical to believe in a God, we are beginning into how he has revealed himself to mankind, which religion is the most reasonable, if any. So that's an idea of what we'll be talking about in the future. But that's all for today. Again, lots of good stuff in the description if you want to learn more. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.